Well, there was a serious controversy earlier this week when a man from St. Louis posted an image online of a bagel cut not in the customary half, but in slices like one would cut a loaf of bread. Well, the outcry from the Jewish community and all bagel lovers everywhere was hilarious and overwrought. Cries of "how dare you!" an accusation of desecration with calls to permanently exile the perpetrator of this outrage. It was really a lot of fun. A few St. Louisians defended the Panera that sliced the bagels thusly, and some people weighed in with earnest calls for tolerance and understanding. "It's just a bagel," said someone, and I thought, oh no, you never say that about the symbolic food of a people. It's like me telling a Southern friend that it's okay to make fried chicken baked in the oven with no seasoning. No, you don't mess around with people's traditional foods. What I'm hoping to do with this series on everyday spiritual practices is to bring into your awareness that whether or not you consider yourselves to be traditionally religious, to make us all aware that there are actually religious customs and traditions wound around and woven through much of our lives that actually gives them order and meaning, and that, for better or for worse, reinforces our identities as individuals and as communities. So without any effort from us at all, except the effort of paying closer attention to how we live our ordinary days, there exists a multitude of opportunities every hour to connect more deeply to the source of life that will tune our hearts and our minds to bigger, deeper, and more meaningful things than much of what actually claims and gets our attention. There's a constant struggle going on for what we're thinking, and what we're thinking, of course, is who we are. That kind of tuning and reorientation doesn't happen without some effort and discipline on our part, which is why we refer to all of those things that we do to allow for that transformation practices. We refer to them as practices. I wanted especially to engage with cooking, food preparation, and eating as an everyday spiritual practice, partly as a way for us to look at the difference between religion and spirituality. Perhaps it hasn't occurred to you that there is anything of the religious in meals. Well, so many times we grab something as we're going about our day, and we eat that something alone, maybe at the desk or in the car or standing alone at the kitchen counter. I confess to doing this: cottage cheese and olives. In those cases, we are eating mindlessly just to put something in our bellies to stave off hunger pangs. But when we eat at table, we conjure up thousands of years of ancestral practice. Jesus certainly knew what he was doing when he instituted the transcendent communion ceremony ritual during his last meal with his followers, his friends, his disciples. He knew that his life would soon be over, and he wanted to make sure his community knew that he would be with them in the breaking of the bread and in the drinking of the wine. "This is my body," he said to them, "and this is my blood." In other words, this is my life force. And when you drink, you're taking it into your own being. I'm here for you. I'm here for you forever because I love you, and I want you to love each other as I have loved you. Every time we eat and drink, we are partaking of the life force of the earth, and also, by extension, the farmers, the workers, and the cooks who prepared the food for our consumption, our nourishment. Every time we eat, We are invited into consideration of profound interconnectedness. And I encourage us to do just that, to make that kind of contemplation our spiritual practice when eating, rather than conjuring up an invisible, wrathful deity who is judging our every bite, the way many of us do. Well, that's just bad religion, and it's bad theology. I'm amazed at the way that even religious liberals who would never think to impose their theological beliefs on another person will nevertheless pronounce restrictive and orthodox commandments on the food choices of others. It is a fascinating hypocrisy and a troubling one, often shaming, and again, essentially religiously conservative, as the dietarily virtuous threaten the sinner with terrible punishments if they don't conform to the true believer's practice. There are new self-anointed high priests and priestesses of various food cults that arise every year. I remember a Thanksgiving dinner spent many years ago with a young and self-righteous vegan who very ostentatiously refused to allow herself any meat and made judgmental remarks about those who were serving themselves up the roast turkey. After the meal, when all were relaxing and enjoying a movie, the young guest shrieked from the other room. Someone had taken Post-it notes and put one on each of her leather boots that were by the door, and then notes simply said, "Moo, moo." I greatly admire people who abstain from eating animals for moral reasons, for ethical reasons. I've tried many times to do it myself, and I go for a while, and then I end up being carnivorous again. So I'm not at all meaning to poke fun at vegetarians or vegans, but just to point out the often unconscious zealotry that accompanies our eating and our examination of what others are eating. We all know that fresh and unprocessed foods are a blessing of the earth and that they're the best things that we can eat. But even as good food can benefit our health, it can't save our souls or even guarantee longer lives or make us more virtuous people, for that matter. Food is food, it's fuel. And it is a huge privilege, actually, to be able to make choices at all about what we eat. And it's important for food evangelists to educate themselves on the class issues and the food supply issues in the areas they are preaching their gospel of clean eating or whatever it is. Not everybody has the same access to the same kinds of foods. Food is life. Food is love, you may have heard. It is comfort. And for those of us who struggle with overeating or disordered eating, learning how to do self-care without having a disordered relationship with food is a very challenging journey. And I thought it was really interesting that even one of our children said, food is comfort, when you're stressed out. And food is magic. I connect this to the religious instinct that leads some people to embrace food fads and diets as salvation. Their expectations, you can tell that they're religiously engaged when their expectations aren't just that they might release some excess weight due to making a commitment to eating differently, but their fervent embrace of keto, is that how you say it, keto? Paleo, vegan, Gwyneth Paltrow, whatever it is, the thing is going to give them a new self, right? And it's going to solve all their problems. They'll be transformed. Except that, of course, the struggle continues every day. Some days and some weeks are happy and balanced and food is not a problem. Some seasons of life are terribly distressing, and during those times, it's really common for people to revert back to comfort eating or eating processed or whatever they're doing. We have to eat every day or we die. So we can't abstain completely from food the way one can abstain from a drug or something else that they're addicted to. And our bodies are constantly changing as we age. And so therefore how we digest and all of those things also change. This is why I encourage us to adopt a spiritual approach to eating rather than a religious or rules and commandments and beliefs-based approach to eating and food preparation. Spiritual approach that focuses on blessing, on interconnectedness, and on gratitude. Food is such a central concern to our lives that it appears right away in the Western book of creation, of the book of Genesis. Even before the God of Genesis has finished creation, God has identified, throughout the earth, I give you all plants that bear seed, and every tree that bears fruit with seed, they shall be yours for food. Of course, except for that tree, you know, that one. And after the flood, you know, the famous Noah and the ark flood, people get meat to eat. So it's a very interesting development there. There's not a lot of fruit and veg on the ark, I guess. And then in the books of Deuteronomy and Leviticus in the Hebrew scriptures, there are lots and lots of specific laws about what is permissible or not. Lots of food laws, that is. In response to those purity laws, which Jesus himself observed, he said, it's not what you put in your mouth that defiles you, but what comes out of it, which is what the kids today call a sick burn. Like, burn. Food is not immoral. Chocolate cake is not bad. And someone is not oh so bad for eating it. But to say so is one of the ways that we bond together by tribe, by socioeconomic class, by kinship circle. I read recently about an Italian-American newlywed, a woman who came to dinner at her in-laws, and she came bearing a hummus that was made out of something like lentils or red kidney beans or something like that. And her Lebanese mother-in-law, who had hitherto been very friendly and accepting, said oh no, what is that? That's not how you make hummus. You make hummus with tahini and chickpeas. And the new daughter-in-law said, wisely, she didn't, double down and say, no, I'm just innovating, come on, we can, she said, why don't you give me your recipe for hummus? Thereby, I think, ensuring probably happy decades of relationship with mother-in-law. Keeping recipes away from outsiders instead of sharing them is also a powerful form of cultural resistance. No one can innovate or assimilate or mess up a food if they don't know how to make it. Food is magic. If you know how to make grandma's brisket exactly the way she makes it, you may usurp her as the matriarch. Do any of you remember the engagement roast chicken recipe that made the rounds in women's magazines not that long ago? It wasn't even, you'd think it was in the 1950s, it was recently. This recipe was legendary for provoking a marriage proposal. It's magic. Food is magic. Speaking of brisket, Passover is in a couple of weeks. A holiday observance that happens entirely around a ritual meal called a Seder. A Jewish joke sums it up this way. Passover is a commemoration of the liberation of the Jewish people from slavery in Egypt. And it is celebrated to this day to celebrate the Jewish people's history, which can be summed up by saying, they tried to kill us, we survived, let's eat. The iconic foods of the Pesach meal all have symbolic meaning that connect to the ancient story of God's deliverance of the Hebrew people. If you're lucky enough to be invited to a Seder, I hope you will attend. And our Muslim friends and neighbors will start their month-long Ramadan fast on May 5th, a practice which is meant to deepen their relationship with their God and to increase their awareness also of those less fortunate. The breaking of the fast at the end of the month is a wonderful feast, another occasion for celebrating the food that is all too easy to take for granted or to treat as a problem. The most spiritual practice that we can engage around food is, of course, to eat together. Michael Pollan, whose books have done a tremendous amount to encourage people towards simple, nourishing food preparation and eating, and who writes with great reverence about cooking, introduced me to the cooking hypothesis, the anthropological cooking hypothesis, in his book called Cooked, A Natural History of Transformation. The hypothesis is that, and these are his words, the advent of cooked food altered the course of human evolution. By providing our forebears with a more energy-dense and easy-to-digest diet, cooked food allowed our brains to grow bigger. Freed from the necessity of spending our days gathering huge quantities of raw food and then chewing and chewing and chewing it, humans could devote their time and their metabolic resources to other purposes, like creating a culture. And something else happened along the way. As humans transitioned from being solo foragers of raw food, feeding themselves on the go and alone, like other animals, cooking gave us not just the meal, but also the occasion, the practice of eating together at an appointed time and place. Voila, community. The shared meal is no small thing, says Pollan. It is the foundation of family life, the place where our children learn the art of conversation and acquire the habits of civilization, sharing, listening, taking turns, navigating differences, arguing without offending. You wonder why churches love our coffee hours? And this is me now. A soup luncheon or a potluck so much? That's why. Because the shared meal is a very basic but beautiful expression of interconnectedness. When we prepare our food to share, we stir into those offerings our own life force. We bring to the table not just a casserole or Swedish meatballs or a salad, but a dish of love and magic, prepared in affection and in the hope that not only the ingredients, but the intention to nourish one another, to nourish each one who takes and eats in body and in spirit.